Welcome back to Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. I'm Jack Llewellyn, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to do a couple of things today. First, we're going to go over a few news items. So we want to talk about the current status of the Mayo case. I want to talk about Ovidio's guilty plea this week. And then I want to spend just a couple of minutes on discovery in the Caro Quintero case. And then we're going to take a few minutes and talk about HSI and DEA and what appears to be a little bit of a battle for territory and some potential changes coming in the way that those departments work. But let's start with El Mayo. If you remember from one of our last episodes, we talked about the fact that the Department of Justice had notified the court that there were plea negotiations in process, and the government thus asked that the next scheduled hearing be postponed. As of today, the next hearing that is on the court docket is August 25th. And presumably sometime near that date, the DOJ will again advise the court as to whether or not there are plea agreements, whether or not there may be a plea pending, and then we'll see if there's actually a hearing on that date. Important to note that the government made it clear in its filing with the court that the death penalty remains in play for El Mayo. That's not at all surprising in that the DOJ generally doesn't take the death penalty off the plate or off the table until, A, they're pretty sure that there's going to be a plea negotiation that ends up resulting in an agreement, and B, that whatever is provided as part of that plea agreement is substantial enough, right? So we'll keep track of what's going on with El Mayo and keep you advised of any developments. Second topic is Ovidio. Lots and lots of news about Ovidio pleading guilty on Friday. I want to take a moment to walk through a little bit of what happened because there was some really bad reporting about the interaction between the cases in New York and Chicago, the federal courts. So let's just walk through this for a moment. Initially, I want you to remember, Ovidio was arrested in January of 2023. He was extradited to the United States in September of 2023. A very quick process. Remember, we talked about it at the time and noted that that is a very, for somebody of his stature in particular, it was a quick process. He was taken to Chicago, and that's where he's been held. He had indictments pending against him in New York and in Chicago, the District of Illinois, right? So, what happened with respect to the charges in New York and the charges in Illinois? There were several reports that said that the charges in New York had been dropped. That is not what happened, right? What happened is Ovidio said, in essence, look, I'm going to plead guilty in New York, but I also have this matter pending in Illinois. And what I'd like to do is wrap it all up into one proceeding where I plead guilty and both cases are taken care of. In fact, there was a filing in the in the Southern District of New York where he said, or signed an affidavit that said, I, Ovidio Guzman Lopez, the defendant, have been informed that an indictment is pending against me in the above-mentioned case. I wish to plead guilty to the offense charged against me to allow for the disposition of the case in the Northern District of Illinois, where I am currently detained, and I waive a trial in the previously mentioned district. The hearing in the Northern District of Illinois was scheduled for July 9th. Ovidio appeared. He was wearing the ubiquitous orange jumpsuit. He also used headphones and an interpreter. He pleaded guilty to 4 of the more serious charges against him, which basically were 2 counts of drug conspiracy and 2 counts of knowingly engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise. Those included charges that had been included in the indictments in both the Northern District of Illinois and the Southern District of New York. There, of course, were proffers where the government laid out the case against Ovidio, some of which he admitted to as part of this process. Essentially, that included the idea that he was involved in the Sinaloa cartel, that the Sinaloa cartel and him in particular were engaged in the business of trafficking drugs, including fentanyl, cocaine, heroin to the United States, those sorts of things. Ovidio, as we know, had faced life in prison. Now it's going to be determined under Section 5K1.1 of the federal sentencing guidelines. It is now incumbent on Ovidio to cooperate with the government and to provide, quote, substantial assistance, close quote, to the government in order to complete the terms of his plea agreement. If the judge determines that Ovidio has fulfilled both of those, that is, he has provided sufficient help and he has provided cooperation with the government, then the prosecutors can recommend sentences that are less than life in prison, and the judge can adjust the sentence based upon Ovidio's cooperation, the substantiality, and those recommendations. It was confirmed during the hearing that Ovidio is in the witness protection program. It is believed that certain members of his immediate family are also in that program. I also want to make sure that we're careful when we see headlines and when we read stories. I'm going to pick one from Fox News. Please don't get mad at me, folks, if you're a Fox News fan. I just want to point out something specific with respect to this investigation, and Ovidio's plea. There was a heading or an article in Fox News last week that essentially says, "Hey, the war on drugs is working. Ovidio is going to be sentenced. He pled guilty. This is a big deal. It's all part of Operation Take Back America under the Trump administration." Okay. Fine. It actually did, Ovidio did plead guilty during the Trump administration. But I remind you, he was arrested in 2023. He was extradited in 2023. And his negotiations started, from everything we've seen, in at a minimum 2024, if not 2023. Thus, while the plea comes out during the Trump administration, it is a little disingenuous to say that the plea was a result of anything that has really been done by the Trump administration. And I think it does matter. So just keep that in mind, and I have a hard time sometimes with, the politics of this or of these cases. But the good news is we now have Ovidio entering a guilty plea. Almost undoubtedly, Joaquin is going to enter a guilty plea fairly soon. El Mayo, the same. Now the interesting thing is going to be what information comes out from that, from those plea agreements. Are we going to learn anything new as a public? Are we, as a universal we, in particular the Department of Justice, HSI, are they going to learn anything new about the operations in Mexico? Is there going to be anything that comes from these plea agreements that really helps the DEA and the other agencies in their efforts against the cartels? Now, obviously, there may be things that have already come out that we don't know about and we may never know about, and that's okay. But we will want to keep track of these things and see what we find out. All right. Caro Quintero, as you know, I hope, Caro Quintero is in jail in federal prison in the Eastern District of New York. There is a criminal case proceeding against him. And recently, the United States government provided discovery to Caro Quintero's defense team, which includes 3 lawyers in the greater New York area. And I want to talk for just a second about these. So the letter was filed on July 4th, but the letter is dated July 2nd, 2025. And it starts saying, enclosed, please find supplemental discovery in accordance with Rule 16 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. Please note the enclosed items constitute sensitive discovery material and are governed by the stipulation and orders previously entered by the court. Okay. That's not uncommon in both civil and criminal trials, where the discovery to be handed out and exchanged between the parties includes sensitive information, and there will be stipulations and orders that discuss how that sensitive information can be used or uses that are prohibited. And it deals with the degree of protection that it has to be afforded, those sorts of things. So the idea that things are sent out that are sensitive discovery and material and their dissemination can be limited is kind of par for the course. But let's look for a minute at what was produced. So first, there were documents and photographs related to a 1981 murder. There were consensually recorded conversations. Then there were documents and photographs related to multiple 1985 murders, which presumably are going to be, obviously, Agent Camarena's murder, but presumably also the murders of Walker and Radalat at La Langosta. And then we have audio recordings of the interrogation and torture of Drug Enforcement Administration Special Agent Enrique Camarena. And last, we have photographs of seized firearms related to this case. I want to talk about the interrogation and torture tapes for just a minute. We've talked about the tapes before, and for a variety of reasons, I've avoided going into great detail. But one of the things we've talked about before and is of some significance is the idea that at trial, 2 DEA agents testified that one of the interrogators on the tapes was Rafael Caro Quintero himself. I've spoken several times with one of those DEA agent witnesses, and he is adamant that he is positive that one of the interrogators during a portion of the interrogation tapes is Rafael Caro Quintero, and he has a fairly spine-chilling story about Caro Quintero that he says makes him always remember Caro's voice. For myself, I have tried to tie the testimony to the interrogation tapes, and I believe there are a few places where I find it unlikely that it was Caro Quintero talking because Caro's being referred to in the third person at the time. Having said that, I have no reason, as I sit here right now, to disbelieve the witness testimony, to disbelieve their own ears, for the idea that Caro Quintero was there for part of the interrogation. One of the questions that has come up recently is by somebody who had emailed me, and I loved this question, is, look, given the time that's passed and advances in technology and stuff, can we analyze the tapes in a different way? And there's a couple of things with respect to that. Number one, in one of the trials, a defense witness was called who tried to poke holes in the transcripts and the voice IDs on those tapes. And frankly, that testimony didn't really go very far. It didn't seem to persuade the jury much at all. The question becomes, all right, now we're 40 years later, 30 years later, 35, can we evaluate the tapes in a new way? There's two issues with respect to that in my mind. One is, as we know, the tapes that will now be analyzed are copies of copies of copies. And the degree to which that limits, even today with the best technology, the ability to really analyze those tapes, and especially for voice identifications or things of that nature, I don't know, but I presume that you would rather have the original than a copy, and certainly than a copy of a copy of a copy. The other thing about the tapes that makes it really hard is that in places, the interrogation is disordered at best. So if you remember, the initial interrogator, who appeared to have some type of training, perhaps law enforcement, is deliberative, he's articulate, he seems to have a plan, and those transcripts, the transcripts of that portion of the interrogation, are fairly easy to follow. Later, there become different interrogators, there become multiple interrogators, and oftentimes the interrogators are talking over themselves. They are not methodical. They do not seem to have a real plan for interrogation as opposed to just throwing out questions. And it gets very, very difficult to tell who's saying what. Even if you wanted to say interrogators 1, 2, and 3, it becomes very, very hard. It becomes hard to hear or understand Agent Camarena for the obvious reasons. So the answer to the question is, I don't know if anything can be done with those tapes, but we will continue to monitor the Caro Quintero case to see if anything comes of that. And of course, some of what we may find out about the tapes in a case, or if the Caro Quintero case goes forward, depends on whether or not it goes forward, or whether there's some type of a plea agreement in process or that comes later on for Caro Quintero. I don't have any inside information on that issue at this point. I hope to have some in the near future. And that's another one. We'll just kind of have to keep our eyes on it and see what's going on. All right. I want to talk about HSI and DEA. And for a lot of us, the first time we really became aware of HSI and kind of their role with the DEA was the capture and arrest of Joaquin and El Mayo. And remember, at that time, there were lots of stories that DEA wasn't really involved, that the surrender of Joaquin and El Mayo was, El Mayo's surrender, you can put in quotes, was to the FBI and HSI. So I thought now would be a good time to maybe talk about the differences between them and then look at how that may be changing. So DEA, most of us understand, I think, what DEA does. It was established in 1973, and its sole role is to implement the Federal Controlled Substances Act, the CSA, which is Title II of the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970. The CSA established a classification system, 5 schedules to identify drugs based on their potential for abuse, their applications in medicine, and their likelihood of producing dependence. DEA is empowered to prosecute violators of laws governing these controlled substances. If every DEA agent, including Camarena, is referred to as a special agent. In part, that means that they are specialized. They have a limited scope of authority. DEA agents can investigate and prosecute, not prosecute people, but prosecute cases relating to controlled substances. A DEA agent is not empowered to investigate, let's say, generally speaking, a bank robbery or a kidnapping. Their jurisdiction is limited, and that is different than other federal law enforcement officials. HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, investigates what are called transnational threats. And here's what HSI says about its own investigations. It says on its website, HSI's value lies in the outcome of our investigations, keeping dangerous drugs and gang members off our streets, identifying and supporting victims rescued from child exploitation, human trafficking, and forced labor, preventing intellectual property theft, and keeping dangerous and deadly technology out of our enemies' hands, stopping financial fraud, illegal trade, and the sale of fake goods to protect the U.S. economy, American businesses, and your money, protecting American consumers, businesses, vulnerable populations, and the public from cyber threats, preventing terrorists and other bad actors from entering the country and harming our people. Goes on to say HSI does this by stopping criminals. We identify, disrupt, and shut down their illegal networks. We seize their money and their assets to keep them from breaking the law again. Our agents arrest criminals and work with prosecutors to provide justice to their victims. So you can see that is a much broader scope of investigation, much broader scope of authority. ABC News had a report. This is dated February 22, 24. So this is in the Biden administration. The report starts off by saying it would take only a small change in legislation to allow more Homeland Security's investigations agents to investigate drug trafficking or drug crimes without first getting the authority to do so from the Justice Department. At the issue is law enforcement agencies' Title 21 authority. As it currently stands, Homeland Security investigations has to ask the Justice Department first before investigating drug crimes. Patrick J. Lechleitner, Deputy Director and Senior Official performing the duties of the Director of ICE, which is Homeland Security Investigations' parent agency, said the statute was written in the 1970s and does not allow for the law enforcement to tackle a 21st century problem. I just think it would benefit the American people just having the authority to just pivot and spin quickly, because we are currently hamstrung, because, we're delegated the authority. So by having the authority fully delegated to us via legislation, literally, we're talking like a few words changed, right? That would reflect the current environment in 2024. We are limited in scope to who can do that. You would instantly add thousands and thousands of agents and officers to combat synthetic opioids and fentanyl, and come and really add a lot more bearing to the fight. It just makes sense. So what he suggests is that the Homeland Security Secretary should have the ability to delegate to the authority to investigate drug crimes without seeking approval from the DEA first, getting that designation. He says, we're trying to fight a very nimble, agile adversary with antiquated rules and regulations. It's just not productive. Legislation was introduced in September of 23, but didn't go anywhere at that time. One of the proponents of a bill was Louisiana GOP Rep. Clay Higgins. He says, due to bureaucratic constraints, HSI lacks the independent statutory authority to enforce drug crimes and target these transnational criminal organizations. It's absurd. This common sense bill adds thousands of highly skilled federal law enforcement officers to lead the fight against drug trafficking at no cost to the American taxpayer. We must work to keep deadly drugs out of our communities and keep America's borders safe. Now, the idea that there were issues in between the authority of and the cooperation of the DEA and HSI is nothing new. In fact, in a letter dated July 21, 2023, Senators James Lankford and John Cornyn asked the Comptroller General of the United States to look into this issue. That letter says, in part, Title 21 grants the DEA the authority to enforce the controlled substances laws of the United States. Oftentimes, HSI works closely with the DEA to investigate crimes related to both controlled substances and transnational crime, despite HSI not having the same Title 21 authority as DEA. DEA has the ability to delegate authority to HSI to investigate Title 21 violations. Given HSI focuses on illegal cross-border movement, it oftentimes encounters the movement of narcotics and other illicit substances. HSI and DEA have expressed frustration regarding the coordination and delegation of efforts to investigate and prosecute Title 21 violations. To ensure that HSI and DEA are working together in a collaborative manner to enforce their existing authorities, we request the GEA report and examine the following questions. And here are the 7 questions presented. Number 1, to what extent have DEA and HSI taken actions to implement the provisions of their cooperative agreement addressing the cross-designation of SHI agents to pursue counter-narcotic investigations, information sharing, and deconfliction of counter-narcotic investigations. Number 2, how much time does it take DEA to grant Title 21 authority to an HSI agent who requests it? Number 3, do HSI agents continue investigating cases with drug components while they wait for Title 21 authority to be granted? Number 4, are there circumstances in which DEA denies Title 21 authority to an HSI agent that requests it? Number 5, are DEA and HSI properly deconflicting cases in a timely manner to ensure no duplicative investigative cases are occurring? Number 6, in what ways can DEA and HSI improve collaboration and coordination within their existing and respective authorities to bring drug traffickers to justice? And finally, 7, are there unique challenges at the border that require enhanced coordination and collaboration between DEA and HSI? If so, what are those challenges, and how can cross-designation help address those challenges? Right. So that was July 21, 2023. Okay. The GAO came out with a study or published a report. That report was dated March 5, 2025, and it's titled Combating Illicit Drugs, Improvements Needed for Coordinating Federal Investigations. It states in part that a January 21, 2021 agreement between the DEA and HSI required the implementation of 2 training models, including a joint training. The goal was to present the information to DEA and HSI special agents with one voice to help ensure consistency in implementing it. It then goes on to say, this report addresses the extent to which DEA is following its process to review HSI agent requests to participate in counter-narcotics investigations and the extent to which DEA and HSI have implemented the provisions of their agreement regarding training requirements. The key takeaways, according to the report: DEA has cross-designated an average of over 4,000 HSI agents per year with the authority to participate in counter-narcotics investigations under Title 21. DEA has not established timeliness goals for its Title 21 cross-designation processes and does not track processing time. This prevents the agency from ensuring that it can make timely, data-driven decisions about the program. DEA and HSI officials have not implemented the training requirements pursuant to their January 2021 agreement. This prevents these agencies from ensuring their agents are properly trained and effectively collaborate on counter-narcotics investigations. The report is fairly detailed, and one of the things is it talks about this kind of annual cross-designation process. So here's how the cross-designation process works on a broad scale. First, an HSI agent in the field requests Title 21 authority from their field office's Title 21 coordinator. The HSI coordinator vets the agent's requests and gives them approval to move forward. The HSI field office then compiles a list of agents for Title 21 approval, sends that list to HSI headquarters. HSI headquarters sends a consolidated request list with requests from all DEA or all HSI field offices to the DEA headquarters annually. DEA headquarters imports the list of agents into its tracking system. The DEA Title 21 coordinator reviews the requests and raises any concerns with the HSI Title 21 coordinator. The two coordinators reconcile any differences and update the list of agents as needed. The DEA Title 21 coordinator provides final approval for the agents and sends that agent approval list to DEA headquarters. DEA headquarters recognizes the cross-designation of the HSI agents to complete the process. So that's the annual process. It does note, though, that in addition to this annual process, DEA and HSI coordinators use an ad hoc process as needed, such as when HSI agents are reassigned from the interior of the nation to the U.S. border. According to DEA and HSI officials, the ad hoc process is beneficial for HSI requests that require an immediate decision. So that's kind of what was found out, and there's a whole number of recommendations. But the idea here is that for many years, there's been a question of the respective authorities of HSI and DEA, or at least what they should be, and a question on this cross-designation, whether it happens in a timely fashion or not, and the degree to which the process in place in any way inhibits counter-narcotics investigations. All of this is important today for a particular reason. A report came out in ProPublica dated June 25, 2025. And it's a long report, but I want you to hear some of what's going on. Excuse me. According to this report, the Trump administration has launched a major reorganization of the U.S. fight against drug traffickers and other transnational criminal groups, setting out a strategy that would give new authority to the Department of Homeland Security and deepen the influence of the White House. The administration's plans would reduce federal prosecutors' control over investigations, shifting key decisions to a network of task forces jointly led by the FBI and HSI. Officials said the plan to bring law enforcement agencies together to create a new Homeland Security task forces has been driven primarily by President Trump's Homeland Security advisor, Stephen Miller, who is closely overseeing the project's implementation. Current and former officials said the proposed reorganization would make it easier for senior officials like Miller to disregard the norms that have long walled off the White House from active criminal investigations. To the administration's credit, they are trying to break down barriers that are hard to break down, said Adam Cohen, a career Justice Department attorney who was fired in March as head of the office that coordinates organized crime investigations involving often competing federal agencies. But you won't have neutral prosecutors weighing the facts and making decisions about who to investigate, he added. The White House will be able to decide. The proposed reorganization would elevate the stature and influence of Homeland Security investigations and ICE among law enforcement agencies while continuing to push other agencies to pursue immigration-related crimes. This is important. The task forces would at least formally subordinate the DEA to HSI and the FBI after a half a century in which the DEA has been the government's lead agency for narcotics enforcement. As I say, this article is pretty in depth. But one thing I want to note in this report: several senior law enforcement officials said that the approach would curtail the independence that investigators need to follow good leads when they see them. Newer and less visible criminal organizations would be more likely to escape scrutiny. In recent years, those officials noted, both Democratic and Republican administrations have tried at times to short-circuit competition for big cases among law enforcement agencies and judicial districts. But that has often led to as many problems as it has solved, they said. For example, as a notable example, several officials said, was a move by the Biden administration's DEA administrator, Ann Milgram, to limit her agency's cooperation with FBI and HSI investigations into fentanyl smuggling by Los Chapitos, the mafia led by the sons of El Chapo. Although the DEA eventually indicted the Chapitos leaders in New York, officials from other agencies complained that Milgram's approach wasted months of work and delayed indictments of some other traffickers. Later, when the FBI secretly arranged the surrender of one of the sons, Joaquin, DEA officials were not told about the operation until it was underway. As to the benefits of competition, prosecutors and agents cite the case of El Chapo himself. Before he was extradited to the United States in January 2017, El Chapo had been indicted by 7 U.S. attorneys' offices, reflecting years-long investigations by the DEA, the FBI, HSI, and others. In the agreement the Justice Department under President Obama brokered, 3 offices led the prosecution, which used the best evidence gathered by all of them. Under the new structure of the Homeland Security Task Forces, federal prosecutors will still generally decide whether to bring charges against criminal groups, but they will have less of a role in determining which criminals to prosecute. So that's the new plan. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I participated in the DEA's Rocky Mountain Regional Field Office Citizens Academy over 8 weeks in March and April, and it was an unbelievable experience. But I am remembering now something that was said on our last night together, kind of during an open Q&A question. And one of the agents said, in a matter-of-fact and not braggadocious way at all, that he firmly believed that the DEA and the DEA agents did what they do better than anybody else, better than any other federal agency, better than any other law enforcement group. The DEA pursues drug traffickers, drug organizations. violators of the controlled substances laws better than any other agency. And I have no reason to disagree, to question that. And frankly, from everything I've learned independently over my career, I have to agree with that. And so it makes you wonder, does it not, what the effect would be if this plan goes into effect. And many of the steps in this are to start taking place in September or by September. How will this affect or impact the ability of the DEA to do what they do better than anyone else? And will it result in increased efficiency in combating cartels and other drug trafficking people and organizations? Or will, as some feared, as we noted, it exacerbate the problems that exist between agencies and decrease the focus and attention on new groups? We'll have to wait and see. I know that there are some DEA agents or former DEA agents who listen to this podcast. I would love to hear their thoughts on this particular plan. And I wish that the ProPublica article had come out before the Citizens Academy ended, even though I plan to reach out and discuss it with some of the agents that I met during that process. All right, folks, that is all for today. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying your summer. It's hot here. I think it's hot in a lot of places. Those people in areas dealing with forest fires, smoke and the like, best wishes to everyone, and hope everybody can stay safe over the summer. And with that, that is Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena for this week, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks, everyone.